Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here. I would like to welcome you to the JSSR 2021. We start with two videos and then we will start the symposium. Thank you very much. Dear ladies and gentlemen, faculty members, researchers, and students all over the world, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, each according to his or her time. Thank you very much for joining us today at the 6th Joint UAE Symposium in Social Robotics JSSR 2021. JSSR has begun in 2015 with a joint effort between the faculty members at the UAE University, represented by Dr. Max, who was in the College of Humanity and Social Science in UAE, and now he's in the University of New South Wales in Sydney, and who is also joining today's session as an organizer and as a speaker, and also faculty members from the New York University, represented by Professor Isel and Dr. Aid, who are also joining today as organizer and as a moderator for some sessions. I myself, Dr. Fadi Al-Najjar, in the College of IT in UAE University, was mainly invited as a speaker in JSSR 2015 and become a member of the JSSR organizer in 2017, and will be also moderating some of today's session. This year, JSSR is organized by the College of IT and the College of Humanity and Social Science, the Science and Innovation Park at UAE University, and the AI and Robotics Lab at UAE University, and the New York University in Abu Dhabi University or Bielefeld in Germany. JSSR is unique in the featuring the multidisciplinary program that bring together non-developers, philosophers, roboticists, engineers, and social scientists from across the globe to discuss the state of art in social robotics. In this year, JSSR discusses an important topic that touches our life in the last year almost. That's the COVID-19. So the organizer therefore organized a title for JSSR 2021 to be Social Robotics Research and Application During the Pandemic. For now, I am pleased and honored to introduce the Dean of the College of IT to start the first sessions, Dr. Tayyip Zinati, Professor Tayyip Zinati, to give a welcome remarks to all distinguished speakers and audience for the first session. Dr. Tayyip, please.
Thank you, Dr. Fadi. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, wherever you are in the world. My name is Tayyip Zinati, and I am the Dean of the College of IT, soon to be named College of Informatics, Computing and Informatics. I would like to welcome all of you on behalf of the United Arab Emirates University and the Planning Committee as well. We warmly welcome you to the symposium in this beautiful city of Al Ain, Abu Dhabi. I think the symposium has become some sort of a tradition since it was created many years ago, and an integral part of the College of Information Technology. This year's conference theme has been carefully chosen to reflect the world's dire need and hope to successfully eradicate this COVID-19 virus. And if you look at the scientists and the researchers all over the world play a significant role in terms of addressing this pandemic. I think the scale of the responses to effectively contain and mitigate the impact of this pandemic has mostly relied on adopting digital technology and integrating it into policy and healthcare. And I think this symposium is well positioned to make a difference and continue in this way. We hope that this year's symposium will bring new insights, fresh ideas, and innovative technology to put an end to this global pandemic. I'm not sure how much longer we can take this. So we're relying on you guys to bring these ideas and this technology. I am sure to put a symposium of this magnitude together on a yearly basis is not a small task. I would like to thank Professor Fadi Al-Najjar and everyone who contributed to making this symposium a success. Lastly, I would like to thank all of the symposium participants for their contribution, which are fundamental of the symposium. Thank you all and enjoy the symposium.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tayyip. And as we know, today we will have two sessions, a session one, which will start from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. and a session two, which will start from 2 to 4. We have selected this time carefully to adopt the different speakers all over the world to have audience from different regions from the world. So please be with us in the two sessions. The first session is mainly about IT, technology. The second session will be more philosophy from the philosophical point of side. So first I would like to introduce Dr. Capitule, who is the organizer of the event, and also will be talking about Robots in Education book, which we work together and is the output or the main output of the JSSR 2020. Dr. Max, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum and good morning, everybody. Can you see me?
Yes.
No, okay. Well, my name is Massimiliano Cappuccio, and I'm senior researcher at University of New South Wales in Australia, and I work in the field of technology ethics and philosophy of artificial intelligence. And I am one of the organizers of this event. I would like to talk about an outcome of our symposium, the outcome of one of the previous editions, because this symposium is very productive in the sense that every year it represents an occasion for researchers from different fields to come together and discuss different issues related to social robotics from different perspectives. But apart from creating this profitable occasion of interaction and encounter, it also we wanted it to be productive in the sense that it produces an outcome, like in the sense something that stays as a publication. So today I'm going to talk about two publications that actually are coming out just now, these days. One is this book that was written entirely last year. It's called, the title is Robots in Education, and it's going to be published by Routledge. This is the English version, but immediately together with the English version, we also have the German version that is going to be published by Hanser. This book, we are very proud of it because it's the outcome of a challenge. So basically last year we ran the 5th edition of our symposium as usual, and we invited a selection of speakers who have a strong background in education and in the applications of robotics in the field of education, coaching, training, interaction with children, and interaction with students. So before the beginning of the 5th edition, we gather here in a lane at the Nat Hotel, and basically for a whole week, from early morning until very late at night, we have been writing full-time this book. So this book was written entirely in 1 week. This was a challenge because we said, is it possible to write a book in 1 week? Well, we were not alone. We had the facilitator who came from Germany, so it's a professional from a Booksprint agency who is specialized exactly in realizing this kind of books. And as a handbook, it was written collectively following a certain methodology. Maybe if you can go to the next slide. Yes, as you see here, we were still in the process of brainstorming. I want to say this is very important. This is not a collection of chapters written individually by different authors. So it's not an edited collection. It's a monograph collectively written by 10 authors, and each of them is equally represented in all the sections, in all the parts of the book. As you can see here, we were discussing about the contents of the book. We decided to focus on education because, as you know, today there is an important debate about using digital technologies and emerging technologies in high school and in university. And with the pandemics, it became even more evident that we need to rely on technologies, at least in certain situations. And robotics represent a new horizon of this development. So this book is a handbook. It's dedicated to researchers in the field of pedagogy, education sciences, child psychology, cognitive psychology, but it's also a book dedicated to teachers, instructors. So those people who are curious, they want to know what it's possible to, how it's possible concretely to use robots in the classroom and in the teaching environment. And of course, developers and researchers in the field of computer science, artificial intelligence, and technology at large. So I just want to briefly tell you about the structure of the book. The book is strong both from the theoretical point of view and from the applied point of view, because we wanted to offer, first of all, a solid theoretical background to those people who want to approach, they want to learn what it's possible to do with robots. And maybe there are people working in education, so they're not so familiar with the engineering and with the technological dimension of robotics, and vice versa. This book is also written for people working in robotics who maybe are not familiar with child psychology or education sciences. So we try to put together these two different worlds. So we offer a solid background in theories of learning, so educational theory, in social psychology and cognitive psychology, to explain the basic terms that is necessary to use when we address issues concerning cognitive development and so on. We have an introduction about robotics, what a robot is and what a robot can do, how a robot should be designed to operate safely and efficaciously in the classroom. And then we start deepening into the possible uses and the applications of robotics. So mainly we focus on two different kinds of uses: robots as a tool and robots as a social agent. Robot as a social agent means that the robot operates in the classroom, taking on a role or a task that usually is done by a teacher, or facilitating the teacher in some of the operations that they usually conduct in the classroom. So in that case, the robot is an enhancer or a facilitator of the teaching process. But when we talk about robots as a tool, then we are considered the robot is not just a means to teach the students, but it's also the object, the content of what is being taught. So for example, consider imagine using Lego constructions or other kind of robots that can be assembled and programmed by students, and that can provide students with very important logical, analytic, and programming skills. Then the book also offers a number of examples of applications, what exactly, how the robot can be used by teachers and those who design curricula and programs. We have a chapter about the attitudes towards robots. So there is a great deal of information about from the field of social psychology and human-robot interaction. We have a chapter on ethics, because of course there is a discourse about values and important ethical principles that is very important when we talk about teaching and interaction with students, which is a very sensitive field. And then there is a chapter about research methods for those who are conducting research in the field of human-robot interaction. In the end, there is also a large, very rich bibliography that can be useful to whoever wants to develop this kind of research. I think well, we will be looking forward to seeing the first copies of this book, which is going to come out just really in a few weeks. And I would like to thank all those who have supported this project, especially the Dean of the College of Humanities and Sciences, the Dean of the College of IT, because they believed in this project last year, and also now we're very happy to be almost ready to see the outcome becoming available. Thanks. So I will pass the word to Dr. Fadi again.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cappuccio, for the introduction of the book, and the floor is of you for introducing our first speakers, Max.
I'm happy to introduce Dr. Christoph Bartnek. He is an associate professor and director of postgraduate studies at the HIT Lab in faraway New Zealand at the University of Canterbury. He has a background in industrial design and human-computer interaction, and his project and studies have been published in leading journals and proceedings at conferences in our field. His interests lie in the field of human-computer interaction, science and technology studies, visual design. More specifically, he focuses on the effect of anthropomorphism on human-robot interaction. And as a secondary research interest, he works on bibliometrical analyses, agent-based social simulations, and the critical review of scientific processes and policies. In the field of design, Christoph investigates the history of product design, tessellations, and photography. So you can see he has multiple interests, a multidisciplinary view, and is in that sense a perfect representative for us as today's keynote speaker in this morning session. Christoph has worked for several international organizations, including Technology Center of Hanover in Germany, at Lego in Denmark, one of his other passions, Eagle River Interactive in the USA, Philips Research in the Netherlands, ATR in faraway Japan, and at Eindhoven University of Technology in the Netherlands. And his work is regularly reported in popular and scientific press, and this includes the New Scientist, Scientific American, Popular Science, Wired, New York Times, The Times, BBC, Huffington Post, Washington Post. You can see he's all over the place with his work, and I'm so delighted that he, as a renowned expert, colleague, and a friend, is joining us this morning to present his work on same but different. Why robots, and even more robots. So a slight change to the title, but I can promise you it's going to be interesting. So the next 40 minutes will be dedicated to his presentation. We hope that we will have some time for discussion from the audience. So audience, you are invited, of course, later on to pose questions. Please refrain from posing questions during the presentation. Make a note and save them for later. We hope we'll have some time left. So Christoph, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us from New Zealand with your presentation. Same but different, robots, and even more robots.
Thank you, Federica, Max, and Fadi for inviting me. And yeah, it's a bit ironic that same but different. I gave this presentation, I have to admit, once before, so it is same, trying to make it a little bit different. And the difference will be right at the beginning, because you guys challenged me to, here we go. Well, Federico already talked about where I've been hanging around on this planet, so we already have that, but you guys challenged me to think about robots in the COVID crisis. And I have to admit that I'm utterly incompetent on this topic. I don't really know much about this. And I know that some of you already actually have done some studies on this and how robots have been used. But anyway, it comes along, or it ties nicely into my talk, because this is just another example of where you have a robot who's got a thermometer in his hand or its hand, and is supposed to be the solution to a problem. And I have to admit, when I start thinking about it, this is not the solution. Because if you put the robot at the airport to prevent people with COVID to enter your country, then this doesn't work, because there are so many people who are asymptomatic, so they don't have any signs or signals or symptoms of the illness, and therefore just taking their temperature doesn't really prevent them from entering. So if you want to do it properly, you kind of have to do what New Zealand is doing. It's like everybody who comes to New Zealand has to go into a 2-week quarantine, and you get regular checks, and you are locked up in a hotel room, and you can't see and talk to anybody. And that is how you filter and prevent people from coming into the country with the illness. And as a result, New Zealand is COVID-free. So I've got the privilege of roaming around in New Zealand just wherever and whenever I want. And I just came back from the swimming pool, and yeah, everything is operational and everything is COVID-free. So this works, but the robots play absolutely no role in this. And then you might think, okay, well, but the idea is good, isn't it? It's like you put a robot in harm's way so that humans don't get harmed. Well, the issue is if you have actually somebody with a higher temperature, then this robot will be unable to deal with it. A robot cannot process such a human being. So it will then be up to a human to interview the person, do further tests. So it doesn't prevent any interaction that follows. So in that sense, it doesn't really help. And also, for every robot you deploy, you need to have a couple of engineers and software people in the background maintaining the robot. So you actually add people to the risk while maybe removing one person who is usually just holding the thermometer. And then again, do you actually need a robot for this? Could you not just have a thermometer? And I used to travel around the globe, and it has been common practice to just have a thermometer on a tripod recording people that entered the airport, and it has been working for years. So all of this in a way looks to me again as a symptom of where we have the solution and now we're looking for a problem to solve. And so, okay, we're all in robotics and we have our robots, and here we are, we can say, okay, look, we contribute, now we're helping the COVID crisis. And I'm not sure that we really do. And this is a symptomatic problem that we have that is in a way inhibiting us from making any real progress. So this is as much, well, maybe I come back a bit to the COVID crisis every once in a while, but just as sort of setting the scene here a little bit. We all know that robots are quite popular, and there's something about it. So here is the robot building in Bangkok, Thailand, which was created by the Bank of Asia, and it's its headquarters. So they built a whole building to look like a robot, and it's a bank. Why would they do that? Of course, robots symbolize something. They symbolize the future and technology, and this bank thought that this is the image that they need to project. So they built a whole building to look like a robot. And it just says how strong the ideas in our society about robots. And of course, there are plenty of robots in the media. And here is a nice little image that you can look and if anybody ever finds Wall-E in this image, please let me know because I'm still struggling to identify him. But this indeed shows a lot of different robots that have been shown in the media. But it's not just the media, because when we did our little book on human-robot interaction, we did a lot of effort into finding nice images and photographs of all the social robots that we've been working with or that we saw or that our colleagues built. And as part of it, we also created a timeline of all these robots about when they all happened. So here you see, for example, in around 2000, Honda produced Asimo. And the interesting thing here is that they stopped in 2018. And this is a pattern that emerged. Most, if not all, of the robots in the book have been discontinued. And now and Pepper are in the book. And my prediction for 2021 will be that SoftBank Robotics will stop producing now and Pepper. Maybe I'm wrong, but I really worry about it's going to happen. And so the question is, why is that? Why do all the robots that we build and bring into the market stop and being discontinued? Literally all of them. I mean, if this is the case, that whenever we try to bring it to the market, it fails, then maybe something is wrong. Maybe something is wrong with what we do or how we do things. There is a potential for real disaster here. So why don't we have a look at an example? This is, of course, the Jibo robot, which you might remember. And Jibo was created by Cynthia Brazel, and she originally started an Indiegogo funding campaign, and they collected around $3 million US, and then you add another $60 million on venture capital to it, and then you get Jibo. And here you've got Cynthia introducing the robot. So I'll try to play the video.
Jibo, please introduce yourself. Sure. Yeah, so I mean, this is actually, we developed several prototypes on the road to where we are right now. And certainly we've done testing all along the way. You know, we very quickly found, and this is just reinforces a lot of what I found as my work at MIT, people want to treat Jibo like a someone, not a something. And they often, at the end of the interaction, would say, we'd ask them explicitly, what's the difference between Jibo and a tablet computer? And they, you know, they owned and had tablet computers. And they said, well, Jibo fits in like family. Jibo's part of the family. You know, Jibo's warm. Jibo's friendly. Jibo's like.
All right, you heard that, right? Jibo is not just a tablet computer. It is a someone, is warm, fits into the family, right? Sounds like a good story. So we have the leading people in robotics. We've got more than $60 million. They made it to the Time magazine cover. They had a major exposure in the media. They did everything right by the book. I mean, you could not do it any better than what they have done. And this is then how it was received.
In July 2014, men did not yet know the dangers of backing just any random Kickstarter and swimming in childlike naivety and blind optimism, over 2,500 people backed Jibo, a social robot companion that the creators, Jibo Inc., promised would do everything from making video calls to reading bedtime stories. And this was long before the Google Assistant or Amazon Echo existed. Now, for my part, it was pretty obvious that Jibo was too ambitious to be anything but an enormous belly flop onto a bed of hot coals. But coming off of the success of my then recent flaying of the Brunton hydrogen reactor, I was looking for a way to up the ante. I was looking for something even dumber to roast. So I bought one. 3.5 years later, my very own Jibo finally showed up. Was it worth the wait? Was it worth $900 US? Of course not. Don't be a Jibo. This video was brought to you.
And yeah, so the reception wasn't particularly good by the media. And then around 2019, the company went bust and it stopped. Jibo was done for. And this is, of course, sad. Quite a few of us might have bought one of these. And yeah, so they did everything right. They even managed to bring it to the market. So it's not like they had so many other crowdsourcing or crowdfunding campaigns where they promised a product and they never built it. No, they actually brought it to the market. And it was a real achievement. And it didn't work. Well, to be precise, in 2020, NTT Disruption bought Jibo. So it was already dead. You know, the company was gone and NTT Disruption decided to buy it. Now, you probably all know NTT, the Japanese telecommunications company. They started a new division called Disruption because they are disruptive, or they want to be disruptive. And just to give you a flavor of what NTT Disruption is about, I can show you the promotion video, the mission statement, so to speak, that they have.
Blitz, what a word. To you, there's no till where, no till here, impossible, unthinkable, crazy thing. All those words you deal with every day. They don't shut you in, they set you free. You need limits to be who you are, to disrupt, to create, to invent. You, the old rules breaker, you, the new rules ruler. You don't live in the real world, some may say. This world of theirs is changing. And thanks to people like you, like us, like her, change is happening. We, the people who see things differently, those who say no to no. You are just a few, some may say. Yes, we are. But those few will create today what really matters.
yeah, so every time I watch this video, this is all stock video, right? So this is all video clips that you can buy off the internet, and you just make a nice script to it and get an engaging speaker, and this is it. And this is part of the problem. Jibo has become a marketing gag, and it fits into this big message of marketing, disruption, innovation, but with not much substance. And this is where it comes in when I say same, but different. They built Jibo, they brought it to the market, and failed. Then NTT comes in and says, oh yeah, we're going to do the same thing, but when we do it, it's going to be different. And I interviewed them. I asked them, I did a podcast episodes on why do all social robots fail? And I interviewed NTT and I asked them, well, what's going to happen? And what are you going to do differently? What is going to be the difference now? And they say, well, we're going to do, healthcare and education. But that is exactly what Jibo was trying to do already. I mean, this was the market that they were also targeting. So it is same, but different. And we always believe that when we do it, it's going to be different, or we are not going to be the one who is going to fail. It's kind of interesting. If you even think about not just Jibo, but others, let's take Pepper. Pepper was originally brought to the market by Aldebaran. It was built by Aldebaran Robotics, and they were bought up by SoftBank. SoftBank was and is a big investment company, but also it started off in Japan as a big telecommunications company. And essentially, they had all these shops where they sell phones. And the first thing they do is that they put Pepper into all of their stores. It's a marketing stunt, right? Yeah, I mean, this is what sets it apart. They can put this into their shops, and then people come in and interact with it. So it's predominantly driven by, it's a marketing gag, and that's pretty much it. And yes, yeah, we get to buy these robots as well and do some other research with it. But the way it came to the life was as for marketing purposes. And you see they've got a touchpad on their chest. Why is that? I mean, that's crazy. And of course, the reason is that speech recognition and these noisy shops don't work. You can't actually talk to the robot. You actually have to use the touchpad to interact with it because speech recognition doesn't work. But then the point is, well, if you're using a touchpad, could you not just have a kiosk there? Wouldn't that do the exact same thing? And from a function perspective, probably yes. I mean, a kiosk would just do the exact same thing, and you don't actually need it to be a robot. So why do you want it to be a robot? Well, you want it to be a robot because it's better marketing. And that's pretty much it. So same, but different. Let's take another example. The Christchurch airport. So the airport here in Christchurch. They bought 3 Pepper robots, and they want to use them for the airport. And it's the same story again. They bought it, and then they couldn't actually do anything with it. So some studies, I mean, some kind of little interactions were produced, and a lot of marketing went into it. A lot of media coverage was generated, but nothing substantial came from it. It can even, so this might be a bit problematic. And one of the reasons, of course, is that Pepper raises so high expectations because of its human shape. And Sony was much smarter with their dog robots because the expectations is much lower. You don't expect it to understand you or to speak back because dogs don't do that. And so a robotic dog wouldn't do either. So that's a much smarter way of approaching it. And, you can even bring it down to the power of the seal, which just purrs and wiggles, and that's it. I mean, you can touch it, but that's it. I mean, this is the level on which social interaction works for a very, very small group of special people, people, for example, with Alzheimer and dementia. They've seen to respond reasonably well to this. But again, this is a very specific market that does exist, but it is not the general social robot that works. So on the other hand, we've got functional robots, like we have floor cleaning robots, and we have other robots, particularly in industry, right? We've got a lot of production robots, and they work, and people buy it, and they stay. Social robots don't have a function. They don't actually do or help us with anything. well, yes, maybe in socializing, companionship, maybe, but they cannot actually do anything. The Pepper robot is pretty useless when it comes to doing anything. It can't pick up a drink from the fridge and bring it to you, which I would really appreciate right now, but that's impossible. So the key question that I would like to raise is, yes, we can improve the intelligence of robot with time and effort. The question is this going to be a game of diminishing returns? That means we can put more and more effort into this problem, but we're never actually going to reach a point where it is an acceptable intelligence. So let me give you an example. I could set myself the goal of jumping to the moon, and I can jump up right now, and I'll probably make it like 10, 20 centimeters into the air, and that's it. Well, you say, well, just put more effort into it, just train and try again. And I can do that. I can train, I can jump, and I can bicycle, and I can get stronger, and I can jump again. And I'm probably going to get a little bit higher, right? And I can train years and years and become super strong with my legs. And yes, I can maybe even touch the ceiling of my room, and I can do that. But still, no matter what I do, I'll never get to the moon. It's never going to happen. So the question that we're really facing with social robots is, will we ever get there? Is it something where no matter how hard we try, we'll never get there? Or is it something that can actually be reached? Because clearly we have made some progress. Yes, we have, robots that can play chess and Go, and there's some sort of progress, obviously. But the question is, will this ever be enough? And I think unless we figure this out, I think this is an important question to figure out. Maybe we cannot figure it out, but it is really an important question, because if it is something that cannot never be reached, then we're wasting our time and we should stop and do something else. Now, the shape of this curve also is unknown. Maybe, predicting the future is always extremely difficult. So how exactly this curve is shaped, probably nobody knows. And again, predicting the future is hard. But this is a fundamental question that we are facing. And of course, there are workarounds. So for example, some of the things you can do is you can not actually be intelligence. You can just fake intelligence, right? So here's an example that we did many, many years ago. These little robots here, they just do word spotting, and we trained them. One of them has been trained as a library, which is based on the Bible. Another one has been trained on the Quran, and another one has been based on the Hindu books. And these robots then just talk to each other.
Turing proposed a test for the intelligence of machines.
I'm not sure if I can forward this.
Despite great efforts, no computer has passed this test so far. Each year, chatbots compete for the Loebner Prize, the first formal instantiation of a Turing test. No contender was able to fool the jury yet. The major problems of the chatbots are the lack of common knowledge and the logical consistency of a dialogue. We explore a new approach to chatbots by focusing on non-logical conversation topics. Mysticism. Found in books of the major religions are widely acknowledged examples of mystical topics. We selected the New Testament, the Quran, and Rig Veda as the knowledge base for our conversational robots. The robots are able to autonomously talk to each other and humans about their religious belief. Each robot represents the belief, but we don't reveal their convictions. This
found alone, and they kept it closed and told no man in those days any of those things which they...
Well, you get the idea. So what we do here is that we take away the need to be reasonable, functional, and logical by talking about mystical topics, and you just respond to each other. And this can all sound very, very smart, but of course, the machines don't really know anything they're talking about. So you can fake intelligence. That's definitely possible. You can also exploit human suspension of disbelief. So when we see robots, they automatically think, oh, this is a robot, it can do all sorts of things, and they start believing you. So you can essentially exploit the weaknesses of humans. And of course, one of the things that we do as researchers is we exploit these dreams and ideas to get research funding. Like we make wonderful proposals to our governments, to attract funding. And not all of the things that we promise are actually things that we can deliver later on. Another thing that you can do to overcome this problem is just the Wizard of Oz. So essentially what you do is you have a robot and you have somebody in the back who remote controls it, and the people who interact with the robot have the impression that they're interacting with a really, really smart robot, but they actually really only interact with a human. And we frequently do this kind of deception in our experiments to overcome problems. Like if you have a robot in a shopping mall and you want it to interact with speech recognition, well, speech recognition is not going to work. So you need somebody, a human listener in the back, just to recognize the text and press the right buttons. So to some degree, there's a legitimacy to this approach, but still, it is not actually solving the real problem. And one, of course, is the biggest thing is that you just declare it. It's not a bug, it's a feature. So one way you can do or come around this problem is just select a very specific group for whom this works. So robots have a problem with it. It's very, very hard for them to be entertaining in a long term. So if they get very, very quickly, very, very boring, then you just select people who actually appreciate repetition, who appreciate that the robot is always doing the same thing. So you then pick people with autism or dementia who really don't care and they actually appreciate this. So you turn this bug and this problem of that we have into a feature. It's actually a good thing that the robot is not smart. It's a good thing that it repeats itself all the time, and that's fine. And this is a little comic picked up. We believe this resolves all remaining questions on this topic. No further research is necessary. Is a text or a sentence that you will never find at the end of any research paper. All of our research paper end with, well, we believe that we need to find more, we have to do more research. So in a way, this is another nice little comic strip where I'm a fiction writer in the grant proposal genre. So this is, in a way, what is happening is that we talk to our government and our funding bodies, and these people have ideas in their mind about robots are and what the future is, and again, the same with the bank in Bangkok. They believe that this is the future, and we use this to get money, and then hopefully we can actually do some real research with it. But we essentially exploit this belief, and for some people, this actually works. So here we have somebody who has got some very interesting opinions about the COVID crisis.
You brought the light inside the bug, which you can do either through the skin or in some other way. And you said you're going to test that too. Sounds interesting. Right, and then I see the disinfectant that knocks it out in a minute. 1 minute. And is there a way we can do something like that? Injection inside or almost a cleaning, because you see it gets in the lungs.
Yeah, so here we have a US president who believes that injecting bleach into your body is the solution for a COVID crisis. So this is how problematic this can become if people have no scientific idea or understanding and then just go by whatever. But, you know, we don't have to go this far to the US. This is now an example from Christchurch, my very own little city. And here we have R.B. Whale. He started a company called the Terrible Foundation, and they promised to build the biggest, best supercomputer in the Southern Hemisphere. And this is what Zach was supposed to do.
We're going to remove the people from the equation everywhere customer support. Charge. So the idea is take the links out of human involved, replace it with a machine, and see what happens. Is it going to be a colossal disaster or a success? We'll find out. We're taking away the management team, we're removing the board, we're taking away the accounts people, product procurement, configuration, provisioning, customer support, social media management, all of it. But beyond that, we're not going to watch it, we're not going to stop it, we're going to let it do what it wants and what it sees to be fit, provided it can present us with a reason for why it's doing it. So it's telling people's accounts, why is it doing it, if it doesn't want to connect, why does it want to do it, all those sorts of things. So there'll be a human oversight, but we're not going to watch it. We made terrible talk for one simple.
So here you have it. Zach, the supercomputer, was built to function as the CEO of the company. That is their proposal. And there are documents available, minutes of meetings, of management meeting for the Terrible Foundation, that show that Zach was talked to as the CEO of the company. And this sounds a bit fantastic, but then we come here, we go to David Whale of the Omega Health organization, and they wanted to use Zach, the supercomputer, in a medical note-taking. And this is a medical doctor now that believed in this.
So we started off to train Zach and were amazed by his ability. In no time at all, we trained him to take notes in SOAP format. That's subjective, what the patient said; objective, what the doctor found; assessment, what the doctor thought the findings meant; and a plan which speaks for itself.
So I'm just going to fast forward here.
All four of the doctors with whom we compared, and these weren't, inexperienced.
So essentially, they did a little bit of a test. They tried Zach versus note-taking by professional doctors, and they found that Zach was so much better in note-taking than doctors were. And again, imagine there's a supercomputer here that listens to the conversation, makes a transcript, and then even makes summaries and suggestions. Whoa, something happened. Sorry for that. I'm screen sharing, that's nice, but where's my presentation? Okay, I hope I'm back.
Yes, you're back, and think of the time, please.
Yeah, okay, I'm hurrying up. The catch is that the recordings had to be sent to Zach by email. And it would take a couple of minutes to respond, a day to respond. You never really knew. And also, Zach was working in this company. You could talk to it as a manager, like so forth. And as it happened, it turns out that all of this was just a big scam. Essentially, it was Albie in the background who responded, pretending to be Zach the supercomputer. And this is, again, the danger where you have people believe in something, and it's highly problematic. So, and of course, with robotics, we've got the Amazon Echo Show now, where you have essentially an animated display that moves around. You don't actually need a robot. You can actually just use, for example, Amazon Echo or Alexa, all these kind of things. So the thing that makes robots special that any conversational agent cannot do is touch. There's the one thing that robots can do that nobody else can do, no technical facility. Like, it can manipulate the physical world and it can touch you. So we did a little experiment where we asked, the interesting thing is that you cannot tickle yourself. You need somebody else to tickle you. This is the only way this works. And this is a very important lesson. So for some tasks, robots are key because they are somebody else. And here's a little example of Papero when it came out. And these are my two beautiful daughters down there. And this was like no experiment. I just popped open the robot, switched it on, and filmed it. And this is what happened. So the important lesson here is that the kids came to the conclusion that the most appropriate way of interacting with this robot is kissing it. It's the embodiment. That is what I mean, it just had some LEDs for the mouth, and that kind of made them believe that this is the appropriate thing to do. And that is the way the power of robotics is the embodiment. So coming back to this question, what is an acceptable level of intelligence, and how can we overcome these problems of the necessary intelligence that we need for this to work? Because if we don't have the necessary intelligence, we will just keep on producing GBOs that will be a nice gimmick, that will be a nice marketing stunt. but they're never really going to get anywhere. And most of all, nobody's going to pay money for it to buy it because it's just not worth it. So if you're interested in this, have a look at my old podcast. We do all sorts of interesting topics around human-robot interaction. The latest episode is about Isaac Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. We've got some interesting books coming up or already published. And with that, I'd like to thank you and take questions.
Thank you very much, Christoph, for this inspiring talk. Now we have some minutes left, roughly 10 minutes to discuss. So I would like to invite the audience. If you may, you can pose questions to our speaker. You may raise the blue Zoom hand, or you may just start speaking if you might like.
Hi there, Eduardo.
Hey, Eduardo.
Australia. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good. Awesome. I was just thinking about these scams that you talk in the presentation. I was wondering how these scams are built. Is that these scammers read our papers and they rely on the broad conclusions that we present? That, you know, in the HR papers, we don't discuss too much about the limitations. As a reviewer, I've always made emphasis that we should present a lot of detail in the limitations of our studies. But I was wondering, as a researcher, to what extent we have contributed to these scams, to what extent our influence is there, or if these people just come up with crazy ideas and they, you know, just realize that the people who review these scams don't know anything about robots. How do you think these scams are built?
Maybe to rephrase the question again, because it was hard to hear to many of you, I assume. What do we as researchers in social robotics contribute to the fact that we are maybe disillusioned in the sense that we think robots can do more than they actually could? Is that maybe correctly rephrased, Eduardo?
That's correct, Frederica.
In our papers, how we present our work, how we address the limitations. And Christoph, what would you have to say in this regard?
I think when we publish scientific papers, we're doing pretty good. Because if we don't, the peer review process is definitely going to take care of that. So I think on a scientific communication of scientist to scientist, we're doing pretty good. The problem is when scientists communicate with non-scientists, that means the general public, or even more problematic with policymakers, politicians, and funding agencies. This is where it gets problematic. And I recently had an interview with Tony Belpain, and I asked him, well, you know, how do you deal with this when you make funding proposals to the European Union and you promise all sorts of things? Is that not a bit dishonest? And Tony said, well, you know, that's just the game, and they're all in on it. The people who receive these proposals, the people who review these proposals, they all know that these are all promises and ideas, and that is not necessarily something that you can achieve. And the problem is, if you are in this competition of who's got the craziest idea, you have to kind of get at the right level. If it's too crazy, they will shut you down because it definitely will be, you know, obviously fantastical. But if you pitch a realistic idea, it will not be exciting enough. And then you also don't get the funding. So getting this right level of excitement without overpromising, this is the art that I don't have.
Right. Thank you.
Further
Drive
questions?
safely, yeah?
Further questions from the audience?
So this is Mohammed speaking. Thanks, very, very interesting talk. I'm really interested in the last part of your talk when you refer to the sense of touch, and that what really made the robot a very special entity to interact with humans. I wonder if you share your thoughts about this comparison of having a physical robot with all the complications and the difficulties of building realistic interactive robots, and having virtual representations of these, and having some sort of human-machine interfaces that can simulate that physical interaction. So what are your thoughts about this? Thank you.
That's a very, very good question. So for a lot of tasks that are about communication only, you don't need to go through the trouble of building a robot. You're probably much better off with a screen-based solution because you don't have to deal with the noisiness of reality. However, if you want to achieve anything in the world, you want to manipulate anything in the world, you want to put an object from A to B, or anything, then you have no other choice. You have to deal with the noisiness of the world. So, and then you have no other choice. So the question is, what is the purpose of the robot? And this is what we're coming back to. What is the robot doing? And the functional robots that actually have a function to do something, they're the ones that succeed in the market. Robots that are only social and the only purpose they have is to communicate and be somehow something, they're the ones that fail in the market. I mean, not for the market for researchers, because we need them as platforms to do all sorts of experiments, but no consumer is paying for them. I mean, yes, you can get a little bit of a hype and then maybe they run for a year or two and then they die. So unless they have a purpose and a function that is useful to people, I think it's going to be very hard for robots to be successful in the market. And achieving this is really, really hard. Getting a robot to do anything is really, really, really hard. And that is the main challenge. And it is so easy in science fiction to imagine how we want robots to be, and you can make movies about it and show it to people, and they all share this idea about the wonderful world of the future with robots in it. But nobody understands probably about how incredibly difficult it is to achieve this. And if you say, look, we're going to improve speech recognition by 5%, which is really, really, really hard thing to do, you're not going to get any funding for it because it's not exciting enough. You know, you have to make these wild promises. And I don't want to assign blame to anybody here because it's a very complex problem here. But I see it as a real problem that this idea of a purely social robot, the market has spoken, it doesn't work, nobody's buying it.
Thanks for that rather pessimistic perspective, particularly for researchers like myself working in social robotics, being a social psychologist interested in exactly improving such social robots. We have only very few minutes left. I see there's maybe a question in the chat that we could try to answer. Let me check. And Christoph, maybe you could check.
It's
no,
Martina.
there is none. It's not a. It's just a note. So, since there are some students from UAEU in the audience as well, if you want, please dare and pose a question. That would be your last chance because we're already running a bit over time. But you could use that chance and get your questions to Professor Bartnek.
Well, maybe I can share another story that Tony told me, which is, again, is very symptomatic of the situation. Tony was invited by a TV producer to make a TV documentary, and it was called The Robot Will See You Now. And it was about how robots could be used in healthcare, particularly in psychology, where they could be a person or something to talk to, and it could be a therapeutical session. And Tony went on like, okay, let's build such a robot. Let's do speech recognition. Let's do a dialogue management. Let's build all these things. And they put a lot of effort into making it work. But then it wasn't exactly snappy. You know, it took the robot some time to find the right response, and it just took time. And the TV people didn't like it. They didn't want this. So eventually they replaced this with a robotic voice, and it was broadcasted. And it was presented as if the robot was this fluent conversational partner. And the TV show never told anybody that this was complete fake. And then people started to call up Tony and asked him, Tony, please, where can I buy this robot? My children are suffering from maybe a depression or have other problems. Where can I buy this robot that will help them? And he had to say, I'm sorry, this was all fake. I'm very sorry, we don't have such a robot. And here you see this problem where we sell this illusion and the media wants it because it's a great story to tell, but we're not there. And if we present with what we can do, it's not necessarily where we want it to be. Why is it not possible to reach to an acceptable level of intelligence? And if it's possible, how long will it take us to reach that level? Oh, that's a very good question. If I knew the answer, I would be a millionaire. Yeah, this is the problem of predicting the future. If you know what the problem is, you can try to fix it, but we don't know what we don't know. That is the problem. And so I'm making this bold claim that I think that maybe we'll never get there. And I cannot prove it. Maybe in 2 years' time, there will be a breakthrough in AI and suddenly all of this becomes possible and we reach the singularity. Yeah, that's what it's called, the singularity, right? It's been promised for a while. Let's see when it comes. So yeah, this will actually be a good test file. When will we ever reach singularity? And since this is being recorded, I'll make you a bet, and maybe I'll put this to the panel. Make a bet when we reach a singularity. I'll pitch the idea, never. And now it's up to you to make a guess. You know, I want to hear from all of you how many years it's going to take.
It's always going to be 50 years from now.
So it's n plus 50.
Yeah.
All right, let's think about it some more, and then maybe we'll figure it out when we meet again, not in 50 years time, because I don't think we will make that, but let's see. Thank you very much, Christoph Bartnek, for your presentation on this critical but inspiring idea. We will be able to maybe look at this question in the panel as well, because this is what will follow next in our scientific program of the morning. So the first scientific part has concluded now, and we'll move on with the panel. So please, Fadi, could you move on with one slide, and then I will guide you through the next 40 minutes. The next 40 minutes are structured as follows. We will have a panel on the topic of conducting HRI research in the time of the pandemic and the challenges, particularly the challenges associated with this, because solutions, as we heard from Professor Bartnek, are hard to bring up. Nevertheless, this panel is valuable and interesting in a way that it will bring together interdisciplinary, internationally renowned experts to speak about the current pragmatic challenge they are facing in doing their HRI related research. So we're switching gears here a bit, basically having a peek into the labs and how basically the pandemic has shaped and changed our research practices, and the agenda. And we will start this panel session by a brief introduction of the panelists that have agreed to join us today. And these will be Professor Belpaime, Professor Mubin, Dr. Ubi, and Dr. Perez Osorio. And we will use the first roughly 15 to 20 minutes for self-introduction of our panelists. And then we have prepared certain questions to the issue of how the pandemic has shaped our research practices. And we invite the audience in the third stage to contribute with their questions. So we hope for a fruitful discussions with all of you, but we'll start out with a brief self-introduction. And you can see already here on the slide, Dr. Tony Pelpaime's picture with the robot, and he can maybe start out presenting himself. And I would ask the panelists to already bear in mind the notion of the pandemic that is all around us, and maybe share with us an anecdote from your lab that speaks to this. So please, Professor Belpaime, would you go ahead and introduce yourself?
So hello everyone, and thank you for having me. It's just it's an absolute pleasure to see you all once again, for some of you, and it's really great to be here. So I work in human robot interaction, and my background is as a computer scientist and electronics engineer, and I kind of wandered into different disciplines. So through working on artificial intelligence and robots,
I kind of got sucked into psychology, cognitive psychology, social psychology, doing experiments. So I'm a bit of a kind of, you know, I know all kinds of trades, but I'm master of none, as the saying goes. And I mainly work on the artificial intelligence of social robots. I do quite a bit of experimental work, so looking how people respond to robots, for example, how much they trust the robots, things like that. And I also use that to build applications. So we're looking, for example, at how robots could be used in education, how they could act as a kind of a support tool for teachers and take over parts of teaching, how robots could be used in hospitals, how they can be used, for example, to support children with autism. So that's kind of what I do. And the topic of this panel, so 1 year of the COVID-19 pandemic, really meant for me that it was a year without any experiments in which we had people meet actual robots. Yeah, so either the law just didn't allow us to bring people into the lab, or even come to the lab, or the university just didn't want that. So it's just a year in which people could not meet our robots. That's the bottom line, and I'll tell you more about how we solve that later.
So then I would invite Dr. Omar Mubin to shortly present himself to the audience.
Yeah, thanks, Frederica. Thanks to all the organizers. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Basically, I'm a senior lecturer in human-computer interaction at the School of Computer Data and Mathematical Sciences at Western Sydney University, based in Australia. Like most of our colleagues and collaborators here, I look into human-robot interaction, but also I've been working in human-agent interaction. So we look at sort of a more, let's say, a loose definition of what's a robot, and we look into different sort of, artifacts like drones. We've looked at virtual agents and so on. Specifically, I look into robots and their applications in education. So we referred to the book a bit earlier, but also talking about how robots can help in public spaces. So we talk about retail situations, and that's an area which has taken a big hit in this COVID pandemic, of course. But recently, and this is sort of based on a sort of interest of mine and a good student workforce, we've been looking a lot into data analytics, and that has helped us to sort of tap into this COVID pandemic we've done some work in modeling in public health, and I'll try to touch upon that as well as when we go through some of the other questions. So, yeah.
So please move one slide further, and I would like to ask Dr. Ubi to present herself quickly.
Yeah, thank you, Frederica. I'm Sophia Ubi, a faculty member at United Arab Emirates University at the College of IT and the Department of Computer Science and Software Engineering. I'm a colleague of Dr. Fadi. My research interest is in human-computer interaction, and specifically in connected health and health informatics. Also conduct research on software engineering. And yeah, the pandemic was difficult for all of us, especially at the beginning. We scheduled so many events and we had experts. So we were like organizing in our research activities, some workshops with human-computer interaction and digital design experts, and everything was booked, the hotels, the flights and everything. And it was very difficult for us to, to tell them that we will cancel, because some of them, they didn't really get the seriousness of this situation. But now they see it like big events, even Expo, and the many events have been postponed. So it was very challenging for us for the pandemic. But I'm looking forward to be part of this panel.
Thank you very much. So finally, our last panelist is Dr. Jairo Perez Osorio, and he will present his perspective on research during the pandemic and first present himself so we have all an idea of what he's working on.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. I'm Jairo Perez. I'm from Colombia. I work currently in the Italian Institute of Technology in the lab of Professor Agnieszka Wikowska. My background is in psychology and social neuroscience. Right now I'm working in human-robot interaction. And what is the impact of the social signals during interaction with robots? Specifically, we measure performance and electrophysiological correlates, mainly EEG, and how we can measure the factors that might elicit the attribution of intentional stance towards robots. Well, the past year was, half of it was crazy for us here, and there was a huge change when the restrictions started to kind of lift, and our work as researchers was considered as essential. So we could go to the lab, and following certain restrictions, we started to collect some data, but less than half of the pace that we were doing it before. So that forces us, in a way, to adopt a new way of testing, which was online testing. And with some of the reticence and for the change of some of us in the group, we decided to move most of our testing online. And this has a lot of advantages and a lot of disadvantages, which I would like to talk later on.
All right, thank you, dear panelists, for starting out with a short introduction. Now we can actually jump right into the details that you've already pointed to. We have already heard from Dr. Belpaeme, for instance, that for 1 year people haven't interacted or seen a robot. We've heard from Dr. Ubi that conferences and workshops had to be cancelled. Dr. Perez pointed to the fact that, we had to switch our research practices to online research, and Dr. Mubin was pointing to the fact that, well, maybe more research into data analytics was then on the agenda. These were already hints that, in fact, the current situation has in fact shaped research practices of professors, postdocs, of many people around the globe, because we're speaking with panelists from all areas of the world, but we are likewise affected by this. And I would like to go into this aspect now in more detail by starting out with the first questions regarding what are the most evident implications of the current pandemic on your research work and practices. And maybe you can really outline what you've already hinted to in your introduction. So we would start, so everybody is aware, with the alphabetical order, so you don't get confused who's going to say next and get worried and get excited. But I would ask Dr. Belpaeme to give it a shot and start the discussion.
Okay, thank you. So as I already mentioned, so for a full year, we had no data come in from real interactions between people and robots. Luckily, we kind of managed to keep busy because we had lots of data lying around, lots of unfinished work that we finally got plenty of time to finish. We worked a bit more on the theory of human-robot interaction, wrote some books and wrote some articles on giving a more kind of theoretical perspective on our field. But to give you an example of the impact, really, is when the pandemic started, we were running experiments together with our collaborators in Colombia, in the capital, Bogota. And we were using a robot to support patients during cardio rehabilitation. So these were all patients who suffered a heart attack, and they needed to keep up with a program of 6 months of exercises. And what we wanted to do was to see how the robots could encourage people to keep up with their exercises, because one of the biggest problems there is that people just don't keep up with 6 months of exercise. Yeah, it's just like you buy the subscription to the gym and you go for a few weeks and then you forget about it. It's the same thing with cardio. And so we wanted this robot to encourage our patients. Now, this is an experiment that had been running for 2.5 years. Yeah? For 2.5 years we had been working on this. So this is just a long-term collaboration. We were every week testing patients. And then suddenly the pandemic happens and we are kicked out of the hospital. And not only that, even our data was still there. You know, we had hard drives with our data on sitting in the hospital and we were not allowed in the hospital to go pick them up. So we stopped the experiment. Yeah, we wanted to have 30 patients and we had complete data on 20 patients and incomplete data on the others. And we thought about it, you know, what do we do? Do we wait until this, you know, just blows over and do we then continue? And soon it was clear that this was never going to happen. So we managed to write things down. And we had to change the kind of the questions that we were asking a little bit. So the initial question was, do people stay with the rehabilitation program longer? And we couldn't answer that question because, hey, we were cut short because of the pandemic. So we had to compare to other things. So, for example, now we looked at physiological parameters. So, for example, do patients who work with a robot get healthier quicker? We did have data on that. So we could write this into a publication, and that has been accepted. So it's kind of great. We had to explain, like, hey, our data is a bit weird. Yeah, we had to stop the experiment halfway. But look at all these interesting things we can report. And luckily, our colleagues who kind of anonymously reviewed that paper did agree that the paper was valuable enough to be published. So it changes things, but at the same time, I don't think we stopped working really. We keep busy and adapt.
So it sounded like you were turning to the literature also more by theorizing, writing papers, writing books, you mentioned.
Absolutely.
So doing the tasks that sometimes fall off the chair, like
it's all these unfinished papers that you have. You know, this idea you once have, and you start writing, you have half a page, and then you forget about it. And now suddenly there's time to finish those things. So it's nice that we can go a bit deeper as well. You know, we can kind of sit back and take a different perspective on our field now, during the pandemic.
Yeah, maybe Dr. Mubin, you will join the conversation now. Maybe you could also already pick up that point in looking at not only the implication for your own research, but yeah, how it basically, did it make you also switch more to the writing tasks that usually are the ones that are last on the list in our research life?
Yeah, so there was a bit of writing that needed to be done, but I think the approach that sort of the people that I work with and the sort of group of students that I had, what we did was, I think it was at one point it was jumping on the bandwagon of doing research just related into COVID-19 modeling. But I guess we've been sort of discussing these two sort of impacts. On the one hand, you've got the impact on physical resources. So, you can't access the labs, you can't have access to the robots. But then you have the second impact, which is the accessibility to human participants. So of course you can't collect data with. So I guess it's important to know that you've got these two two-pronged impact that you have. So we thought, okay, we can't collect data, but I think this sort of touches upon what Professor Belpiame said, that let's look at what's already existing out there. So we've got these large corpuses of data, we've got this large amounts of data that's available. Let's see what we can do with this. And this doesn't need to apply to COVID-19 data, but this could apply to, let's say, you've got a database of facial expressions, you've got a database of how humans interact with robots, and then you could do some kind of, analysis or modeling on this, or you could do you could do statistical modeling on this. So we said, okay, we've got this pandemic here. Everybody's investing a lot of effort into generating this data. Let's see if we can tap into this, and if we can, and the work that we did, and some of the work was with UA University, along the lines of risk assessment of COVID-19, impact of pharmaceutical interventions. So, what's, the impact of the different lockdowns. We did some work on contract tracing mobile applications. So we tried to touch in, sort of do research that was sort of based on the pandemic, but also, touching upon the fact that there's a lot of data that's out there that can be used. So many repositories available. John Hopkins maintains. The other good thing is that whenever there's a repository, there's also an API available, so you can easily tap into the data. You can read the data. You can mine the data as well as you want. And the good thing out of all of this was that there was the venues or the outlets for dissemination. They had quicker timelines, so the review processes were not as we would typically see in HRI disciplines, where it can go several months or even more than a year. But COVID papers were being reviewed very quickly. Sometimes, if it's within a month, within a few weeks, you just because of the sort of the turnaround time was very quick, because it was a sort of an important topic. Of course, all of this means, and this is something that researchers and science is looking into, that now we have such a large set of literature on COVID-19. How much of that is actually, really useful towards public health and towards intervention? So this is sort of a delicate balance that needs to be, maintained. So yeah, I mean, this is sort of just a quick summary of the rescoping that we did, and I mean, later on I can talk a little bit more about the impact that this had, and sort of, I think there are one or two key benefits as well of COVID-19 that we can also discuss later on. So.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Mumin. Dr. Upi, would you like to share your perspective with us?
Yes, so just not to repeat what Professor Tony and Dr. Amar said, but just to confirm that many experimentation and empirical research has stopped or has been impacted, and this shift, the focus shifted toward a different kind of research, as you suggested, the literature, looking more at literature, and also for COVID, the impact on COVID and so on. So my research, I have research projects on mental health, and it was very difficult to access mental health professionals, patients. However, there has been like a lot of information out there about the impact on mental health care workforce. Also, we conducted research, but it's like online surveys. We cannot have something like face-to-face at the beginning, but now we can, but we need to respect the measurements of safety and so on. So there are a lot of guidelines that impacts conducting empirical evaluation. However, I know many colleagues, they suffered because of the lockdown, and they just focused on doing more research. So now they have more papers. They have like this peak of productivity, especially those that work on COVID, as suggested by Dr. Amar, because the review process is so quick. So you can have a lot of outcomes from this. So this was, an impact, a load of work and more research, and just the change of the focus. Also, of course, there is the psychological impact and on our students and so on, but we can discuss this later.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Perez, maybe you would close that final round with the first question.
So for us at the beginning, we had some data. We started to write up all the stuff that we have, but we definitely needed to have more data. So we had to adapt. And we know that in this academic world, flexibility is the cue. So we tried to move all these studies that we had, all these ideas, and try to test what these online platforms would allow us to do. So we started to run behavioral experiments. We started to move from eye tracking to mouse tracking. Is it working? Is it good enough? And the answer is yes. And some of my colleagues did some studies in this direction. And then what we tried to do was to find the right experimental design. We have ideas, and for the first time, we have these pull-up subjects that are online on their homes with their computers, waiting for collecting some so money. So we designed several combinations of the experiments and send it out and see which ones were like the most effective in measuring what we were interested to measure. That gave us the chance to create more efficient pilots. And then when the restrictions were a bit lifted, and then we start to go to the lab, we moved these paradigms to the context in the lab. So also at the beginning, it was difficult to do studies with the robots. So we were doing screen-based studies. But then there was a curious detail, more like anecdotic. So here the hairdressings were closed. So we said, okay, we cannot do EEG. But the day that the hairdressings open, we're gonna do EEG. And this is exactly what it happens. They opened and they say, like, yeah, we're ready to do electroencephalography. We got our participants in the lab and we moved to the design that we were confident that would have an impact. And then we move later on to the robot. Fortunately, we have the chance to bring people to the lab. There are a lot of restricted measures. There is like an amount of people that should be there, the mask, all the PPE that we have to take. But it was a good challenge. We also managed to test our questionnaires to different populations. So we have questionnaires to validate. So we adapt these questionnaires that we have in online platforms and have a vast and rich sample. Of course, that help us to like grindly understand what are the problems with these big samples and learn that there are some things that we should definitely do online and some things that can just be only done in the lab.
So from what I understand, you basically use the online phase as a pre-test pilot phase for your questionnaire setups, or maybe you're testing your manipulations to then, once the lockdown was less restricted, you could test that in the laboratory setting. I was curious whether, for instance, doing this, very close-up type of research using the EEG, are participants actually willing to come to the lab and do such type of research, or aren't they a bit afraid? Doesn't that kick in? I mean, from our researcher perspective, we take all the safety measures and put everything in place so it's actually safe, of course. But on the part of the participants, have you noticed changes here, or a drop down, or do they actually come to the lab to participate in your research?
So we have very strict measures. We have the temperature measures at the entrance. People have to declare that they have not been involved with any cases with COVID. We all in the lab have a maximum amount of people that can be there. Everybody's wearing the mask and we save the distance. There are very strict protocols. And we were afraid also about the same. But surprisingly, after so long, students have been also online, taking classes online. They are looking forward to new activities and they are motivated to come to the lab and take part. This is mostly, we work with healthy young adults. So let's say they don't have a comprehension of the risk, or they don't have so much risk related to COVID. So they are actually very interested to come and participate, especially when the experiment is with the robot.
Yeah. Thank you. Dr. Belpoemi, you have already mentioned that your lab was rather going more low-key in the past year, but have you resumed your research activities, or how did the actual research practices become changed, or how is the situation right now? Or have you resumed experimental work? Because your research agenda also features research, you said, with autistic children in hospital settings or in education, like probably also involving placing robots in schools. How was that current condition affecting this line of research? You mentioned also the hospital example in Colombia, but yeah.
But it hasn't changed for an entire year. No people met robots here. It's just either the law is very strict, or if the law isn't strict, the university is very strict. We are not allowed to run studies with participants. It's just not possible. And so the one way of still collecting data is to go online. As Jairo said, and I think it's difficult. Yeah. So sometimes, you know, we're kind of used to collecting data online. Yes. And there are many platforms that support that, such as Amazon Mechanical Turk or Prolific, which we prefer to use because the participants get a better payment. And for some things it works. Yeah. And somehow the people who swear by these online data collection systems, they claim that the data that they get is of a quality that is very similar to what you would get when you're collecting data in the lab. But I think for human robot interaction, it doesn't always work. Certainly not if when you're looking at pictures of robots or videos of robots, the physical dimension is missing. You're looking at pictures of a robot on a screen. That robot isn't sitting in front of you. That robot can't touch you. You can't touch that robot. And there's something really missing in the interaction. So I think that the data we're collecting in that way is very impoverished. So I don't even go there. So the only data that we collect online using crowdsourcing is, for example, comparative data, where we say like, oh, we've got an algorithm that generates, say, motion, and we want to see which of the two motions looks more human-like or something. And then we have a small animated robot moving, and you need to choose which of the two robots looks more natural. That you can still do. I don't think the physical component really is needed there. There's no really interaction. You're just an observer. But I kind of see it in lots of work from my colleagues as well. That is, that's being submitted to various conferences, and that ends up on my desk. There's a lot of crowdsourcing now. Yeah? People collect data, too much data, using online tools and or online methods. And I think sometimes without critically reflecting what they miss when they're collecting data online.
And this reminds me also of the statement that Dr. Bartnick gave during his keynote, where he said, like, embodiment is one of the key features. And of course, that's particularly what we are missing. And I myself, as a psychologist, remember when we had to work with systems that were not yet able to actually engage in HRI with, so human robot interaction with actual users. We always had to rely on these robots. And we were so happy when we ultimately went beyond that. And I have the impression that this current pandemic basically kicks us back like 10 years before, and we're back at this point where we had to use videos, had to use picture materials to kind of get an approximation of what people could ultimately think about these robots. So it's I think has a huge impact on the discipline at large, and how we actually come to our conclusions. And in that sense, these conclusions might be quite limited based on the data, even though crowdsourcing, as you said, is ubiquitous and the measure of the day. But we heard also from Dr. Mubin that you indeed have also become interested in the topic itself by looking at data on COVID and going into data and analytics, saying like, yeah, we jumped on the bandwagon of this current situation. So maybe you want to let us know a bit more of maybe also what you
so just
are
going back a
researching
little bit to the so going back a little bit, maybe just touch a little bit more on the HRI perspective, because I think Professor Belpiame mentioned the crowdsourcing as an important methodology to sort of evaluate your experiments or your research questions. So crowdsourcing is sort of the main participant base, but I think the other important question also should be is what tasks should be given to the participants? Is it in the sense that I think there are maybe at least three possibilities. So, one's an option where the participant can online interact with a virtual agent. The second condition, or the second possibility, is where they can interact with a real robot, which is online. Which obviously means then somebody needs to be controlling the robot. And the third possibility, which I think is perhaps a little bit more robust, is kind of like a video scenario or a video prototype, where we do like a role play, where in the sense that we as the researchers, we interact with the robot, we video record that, and then that is played back to the pool of participants, and then we get their sort of their ratings through a questionnaire or so on. And these are the techniques that I've tried to do with a student of mine, where we said that we'll just do these role play kind of videos, and then we can do like an online survey, and that can be, perhaps it's less onerous as well, rather than running these online experiments, because we need to remember that, and I think this is one of the follow-up questions, is that Zoom settings can be really tiring, and that's something that we need to take into account, is sort of this sort of online burden that we have. I think the key thing also to note here is the future pretty much looks like it will be online for the time to come. So we as HRI or robotic researchers, we should look into coming up with methodologies for doing these online experiments, and for doing these online research, and what would be the best way to collect the data, to manage the data, and engage with the participants, especially considering that universities and I think, again, this was mentioned by Professor Belpiami, there's a lot of red tape involved in doing research with participants. In Australia, at least, things have been normal for a while, and we are allowed to do data collection with participants, but then there's a lot of ethical checks, and there's a lot of red tape, and a lot of forms that need to be done, and a lot of steps that need to be approved before you actually can head out and collect the data, and probably you wouldn't still be able to go into a school or go into a hospital to collect that data. So again, going back, I think we should really look into how we can set up these methodologies, do a methodological contribution towards the field, like coming up with some kind of framework, or questionnaire, survey instruments, or whatever it may be, to do these kind of studies for HRI, I think.
Yeah, would you have some concrete ideas for us to share how to go into that? You mentioned your students' work already. Was that going into this direction?
Yeah, so what we try to do is this kind of role play scenario, where we as the researchers, we recorded these different interaction conditions with the robots. So we had Pepper and we had Now, and we did these recordings, and then we would play them back in an online survey. We still haven't analyzed the results, and it's just to try to see how this really works. I think it's easier in the sense that we just do these recordings in a couple of days or 3 days, and then we can just run an online survey and have these evaluated, rather than having every participant interact with the robot, which is, again, remains to be seen if this is really it mimics, or it's like a real sort of a real experience, because interacting with a robot over a Zoom call really doesn't sound very intuitive or natural, as compared to seeing somebody interact with the robot, which is like a hypothetical scenario where we create this sort of imaginary setting, and we sort of put the participant in sort of this situation where, let's say there's a role play actor who's in this situation interacting with the robot, and then we manipulate the conditions, whatever, based on your research question, and then we try to evaluate this. But again, I think all of us are just trying these different sort of settings, and I don't think I have the real answer at this point as to which sort of technique is the best approach. I think it's just sort of I guess a hit and miss and hit and trial situation at this point.
Yeah, it has to emerge basically from our trial and error attempts in the different ways.
Something
but we
like
also
that, yeah.
we can also already hear that across the different labs, there are so many restrictions in place, or you're more free to do research, which also creates an imbalance or a difficulty in for all of us to engage in productive research during such times. Dr. Ubi, would you like to add to this discussion from your perspective and the pragmatics of the implications involved?
Yeah, I think that this pandemic has a huge impact on the quality of the research conducted for the human-computer interaction and human-robotic interaction. Because what we're missing the human part and the interaction part. And of course, the research community showed a lot of agility and resilience switching to the online, because this is one way to conduct research and collecting the perspective and perception of the human, like the users. So it is very challenging. So some even can say that it's like currently in a paralysis for like conduct real research for human robotic interaction. But what we can do is try to come up with some solutions as suggested by Dr. Mubin and also Professor Tony, and we try our best. And the thing that we really feel, especially in academia, due to the pandemic and the lockdown and everything, is the students. So we rely on, for the experiments, large parts, we rely on the students to conduct those. And it's a very good opportunity for them to learn and to interact with robots. And that's what we've been missing. And even now, depends on where you are located. So New Zealand, you're lucky. But if you're in other parts of the world, so there are like challenges to ensure the safety of the students and also for the research team. So there is a lot of problem related to the empirical evaluation. And even research agendas, like many milestones have been impacted, and we need to rethink the whole thing to adapt to the situation.
Yeah, so it's going beyond individual labs, but rather the impact is on the community at large, requesting us basically to reconsider, rethink our research practices, the research agendas that you mentioned. Since time is running pretty fast, I would say if there are questions in the audience, you are free to post them now, either through the chat or by just speaking to our panelists directly. Maybe you can address specific panelists if you have one in mind, and we can only briefly open up to the general audience to enrich the discussion that way. So would there be questions from the side of the audience? So here's one. How is the motivation of you and your students doing online experiments compared with the previous scenario, the actual HRI? How is this affecting the graduation of postgraduate students? So what are the actual pragmatic implications for them, and how is motivation affected? That's a question posed in the chat.
I'm happy to talk about that. So for our students who were doing, for example, a master thesis, or for PhD students, it has messed up things tremendously. So I had a bunch of students who were due to work on robots, and then suddenly the robots are not available. They're not allowed to come to university. So we had to completely change what they were doing. Work with a webcam from home, use your family as your participants, and yes, it's bad science, of course, but just show that you're aware of that as well, and say, like, look, hey, things changed, and we didn't stop them from graduating. It's not because they had to change things, change the plan and not use robots that they couldn't graduate. But it's not brilliant research. It's not something that we could publish anywhere.
Any further questions from the audience? Maybe one last one? Is there one left? I don't hear anyone. If this is not the case,
there's a question in the chat, though.
What?
There's a question in the chat.
Is there another one? Oh, great. Let me see. Maybe you can let us know. So there's a long one now. Dr. Perez Osorio mentioned that he explored new research designs to the current restrictions. I think the current restrictions challenged all of us to be more creative. What are some other positive aspects the panelists have experienced during the pandemic? For example, I think of having online conferences like these also has some positive impact. Indeed, I would agree. Being able to interact with international colleagues while saving travel time. Yeah. Would you like to quickly go to that issue, any of you on the panel? The advantages.
Yeah, perhaps I can quickly just reflect on that. So of course, reduce carbon footprint, more sustainable. we've all seen reduced pollution everywhere in the world when we had those lockdowns. But I think conferences are cheaper to attend. So I think it was one of the top artificial intelligence conferences. I forgot the name. Usually goes like $1,000, but that was going at even less than $100 just recently. So I think that's sort of the one of the main the inclusion aspect. That we have people from all over the world who are able to attend attend these conferences that they would not have been able to attend. So I think the inclusion aspect is very important.
And Tony, sorry. Just in agreement, I wanted to point to Tony Belpaeme, who has organized the flagship conference in our field, the HRI. And did you notice a drop in numbers of online visitors when you had to switch to the, or when this had to?
It was difficult to say actually, because the conference was due to be organized in March last year, really, and the lockdown came into place just weeks before. So we had to improvise, and we didn't have a live event. We just asked people to post videos of their research online so that people could watch the videos whenever they wanted. So there wasn't any opportunity to meet or to have some kind of live interaction as most conferences organize now. So it's hard to say what happened. I think the interesting conference to look at is going to be the upcoming Human Robot Interaction Conference, which was due to be held in Boulder, Colorado, and is going online. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there, how many people actually engage with that conference. But I so agree with Dr. Mebin. It's this carbon footprint, but it increases inclusivity. On the other hand, I miss meeting people. It's lovely to see all your tiny faces here on my screen, but I really miss meeting people. And I find that I have the best contact really with people who I've already met before, who I met in person before. And those, that remains strong online. But people who I haven't really physically met, and I don't know if it's the same for everyone here, but people who I haven't physically met, it's just more distant. So I really look forward to seeing all of you.
Yeah, so maybe we could,
in the near future.
We could use that as a concluding remark for our panel session, because we would move on with the program. But we would, for instance, hope to see you live and not on Zoom in our next edition of JSSR as part of the Expo in 2022. So really, that could be a short-term goal to maybe meet in person again, now that you have already met us virtually before as some sort of pilot phase. We can meet hopefully face to face and discuss this exciting research and the research practices. And maybe by then we also have a meta perspective on methodologies and approaches, how to actually positively impact HRI research in the lab, beyond the lab, and move to other measures, basically. Yeah, with that said, thank you very much, dear panelists, for your contributions, for your thoughts, for your inspirations, and we will take that with us, and we will move on now with the final part of our morning program to conclude our session 1 of this morning. So, Dr. Al-Najjar, could you switch to the next slide? I think then we will have the introduction from Dr. Eid for our guest speaker from New York University, Abu Dhabi.
Thank you very much, Professor Isiel, for leading this very interesting panel discussion. It gives me a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Professor Borja Garcia de Soto. He's an assistant professor of civil and urban engineering at New York University in Abu Dhabi here, and he's also a global network assistant professor in the Department of Civil and Urban Engineering at Tendon School of Engineering in New York. He's directing the Smart Construction Research Group at NYU Abu Dhabi, who he has started a few years ago, and They're conducting research in areas in automation and robotics and construction. They're doing also cybersecurity. They're doing AI, building information modeling, among others. Professor Di Soto has, on top of his academic and teaching experience, he has also extensive experience in the industry. He was a structural engineer, project manager, and construction consultant in many places. He's a professional engineer with licenses in California and Florida, with international expertise in multiple aspects related to construction projects. He received his PhD from ETH in Zurich, Switzerland. Then he had actually 2 master's degrees in civil engineering, one from UC Berkeley, University of California at Berkeley, and one from Florida International University, where he got his undergrad BS in civil engineering. With no further ado, I would like to welcome Professor Di Soto to give his talk. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation to be part of our speakers. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me, particularly to you, Mohammed. I think it's a great opportunity. And thank you for a very, very long, but a very complete introduction. So I don't know if maybe I can share my screen with you guys.
Yes, you can. You should. Yeah.
Let's see. Okay, so hopefully you can see my screen now. And I guess the most obvious question might be, what is a civil engineer have to do with a symposium in social robotics, right? So hopefully during the next 15 or so minutes, and I realize we're running out of time, so we'll try to speed up things a little bit. I will try to take you on a journey about how robotics and automation has been played into the construction sector in particular, right? And I would like to use this image, as probably all of you have access to it, just to give you an insight into a construction site. I don't know how much familiar you might be with construction sites, but in general, they're very chaotic and very unorganized environments, right? You have a lot of people, you have a lot of different trades, different things happening. So it's really conceptually hard to automate or even introduce robots to these environments, right? So with this in mind, I would like to talk about what has happened in the industry regarding the automation and robotics, and whether or not we're ready now. And I have here again, because you will see that we have already tried in several occasions. And I'm glad that some of the previous speakers mentioned about this kind of disappearance or discontinuity of some of the things that we were doing, right? So this would be a good, hopefully, fix together. So a bit of background, right? If you look at how we're building things, it hasn't really changed significantly. If you look at how we are putting together different elements, still we rely heavily in workers, climbing up to whatever floor and manually doing things. Of course, there's no doubt we have come a long way with safety regulations, safety standard, and this is pretty much the most obvious element in this picture, right? You can see people nowadays are more conscious about safety, hard hats, harnesses, lifelines, and things like that. But in general, the processes have not really changed drastically. Of course, this has had an impact in productivity, right? When you look across different industries, and I'm not very proud of this, but I don't know if you can see the orange line. This is really the construction sector, right? We are actually, depending on how you look at it, declining in the sense of productivity. This might be a bit tough, but because you need to understand also, we have now much stricter regulations. We have now much, airtight and efficient buildings, materials, and so forth. So it's not probably a fair comparison, but the point here is that we could do much better in the sense of how we are, delivering projects by taking advantage of new technologies, including robotics, right? One of the big issues we are still facing in construction is safety. Unfortunately, every year we are on the top of the rankings for fatalities. And this is depending, again, on different regions, different cultures, but construction is typically at the top of the list when it comes to people relying on construction sites. We are relatively a very dangerous industry. And all these components, you know, as we are building on them, you can realize the value of automating or bringing robots to execute some of the tasks that we'd rather not do, right? Another component, and I would like to raise this issue, I don't know if this is common and I think it's in general for all industries, but I don't know if you guys are experiencing something similar. We are getting worried because we don't have enough skilled workers in the long term, right? Right now, in some places, we are having this gap of people to actually do a specific task in construction activities. And when we look at the long term, we're seeing this decline in the work age population, right? And this actually, in Japan, they realized this issue early on, and they were one of the promoters or the pioneers, if you will, in the introduction of robots in construction, and we will see that a little bit later. But again, I'm just setting the stage to identify, you know, things that the industry has gone through, still is going through, but at the same time are very good applications or good candidates for automating some of the things. Of course, as in most technologies, you know, as time passes by, you have reduction in prices, right? So the price of robots now is, you know, a fraction of what it used to be, at least for the different components when you look at sensors and so forth. But also, even if the price has gone down, the quality and the performance of those sensors has really improved significantly. On the other hand, labor costs are increasing. And for a very labor-intense industry like construction, this is a big deal, right? Because then your profit margins go down. You kind of really, you know, run out of options to make, you know, competitive biddings to get, you know, a good return on your investment. But as prices of robots are going down, now construction companies are thinking this twice, because they might say, okay, maybe if I automate some of the processes, I'm able to save some money on that. I could really make an impact at the bottom line. However, as some of you have mentioned in other contexts, robots really, the actual realization of a robot is not simple. When you put it in the context of construction, you can imagine the multiple difficulties that you're facing, right? You're not only able to navigate through very, you know, non-conventional or not organized or structured environments, but also you have to deal with different things that are typically not standardized, like different size of blocks, for example, or columns or beams of different you know, dimensions. So being able to accommodate and to handle these things is not really trivial when you try to come out with a robotic system that would be able to do that. Also, not only in addition to being able to navigate and recognize your environment, the robotic systems will have to be, you know, adjusted to compensate for different environmental conditions, like, you know, if it's raining or not. Is it too hot? Does it affect the sensors that you're dealing with? It's typically very dusty and very dirty, right? Which is not the traditional settings for, you know, industrial construction or industrial manufacturing when you have these robotic settings. And of course, ideally, you don't want a robot to do one single thing, because it will not be very effective, both from the economic side, but also from the production side. Then you will need to come up with robots that are easily adaptable and easy to change to do multiple things, right? So it's still, point here, it's not trivial, as in many other cases, to do a robot applied to construction. But we look at the history, probably, I don't know how familiar you are with the you know, news in construction robots, but they are now popping up significantly in the last 4 or 5 years. And when you go back in the late 60s, we had something similar happening, particularly in Japan, as I mentioned before. They realized, you know, our workforce is getting old. The newer generations don't find construction very attractive. It's a very, you know, demanding job. It's not healthy or exposes you to hazardous conditions. So you rather do something else, right? So they start heavily investing in construction, right? Robots. It was in the late 70s when the Industrial Robotics Association in Japan started to investigate seriously the construction applied to the robots. And a number of organizations and committees at the higher level, let's say, were starting to pop up and organize. And something happened in the sense of the industry got together and they really created this consortium, if you will, to really devote significant part of their income or their profits to research and development, which is completely not traditional and non-seen even today in construction firms. But this kind of really pushed heavily into looking at what things could be automated, what type of systems could be automated, and so forth. And it was in the early 80s that these things started to materialize and started to come out with prototypes and things like that. Without getting too much on the details here, I just want to realize, what we're experiencing now in construction and robotics is nothing really new. We're just going through this kind of cycle that I guess many other industries have gone through. Some of the quickly just to show you some of the applications back in the 80s, again, now is a gray line, right? For us in the construction, civil engineering field, a robot has many definitions, right? So some people might refer to this as a robot, even though I think in a more traditional way, it should be more correct to say this is more like a tool that will assist workers, right? It's not really autonomous. It's not really able to do anything by itself. You always rely on operators, right? So, but I just wanted to give you a feeling of the kind of things that we were thinking about, in the 80s. And when you go back to construction, quickly examples of the different life cycle, inspection mechanisms, painting of exterior and interior walls, all the type of things that we were trying to automate, we tried. When we got to the actual execution, like the actual construction of buildings, we actually went a bit beyond in the sense that we set up mechanisms and environments that allow you to, duplicate factory settings, if you will, on construction sites, and then, build high-rise buildings in that way. I'm just gonna show you this slide. You can see some of the applications. I will not go through the details, but there are about 20 or so cases documented, and they all happened in Japan in the 90s or so. None of this technology, made it through or really propagated to other places, and it's not really, sure why that happened. But just to give you an insight into how these sky factories look like, I guess you can see on the image here, but the point is to go through the process quickly. You will start at the ground level and start, you will have your factory setting. You could see probably better on this view, where you have your, robotic arms, your welding mechanisms to, put together different beams and different columns and so forth. And as you were building your floors, the whole factory will start climbing as you were building different slabs and so forth, right? This is how the interior of the Sky factory will look like, and it's very similar to any factory that you can think of, right? You have very clean, organized environments. You have your overhead manipulators. You have a lot of standardization, common shapes, things that really help, kind of break these chaotic environments of traditional sites. So really, what this combined or this really meant was to rethink how we were building things at that time. Some of the features of the Sky factories, again, in the 80s, is about, the automatic welding. We have robotic arms that were able to identify the type of weld that has to be done, where it had to be done, and then execute that with minimal, human intervention other than remote operation. So you take the humans away from the danger areas, if you will. You have this system of overhead manipulators, mostly where gantry cranes allowing to transfer equipment and materials from one place to another without really the involvement of workers on site. Of course, traditional things will be more like a crane, but still you will not have this control environments. Now we want also, back in the 80s, I think I want to stress that, right? What we're doing now is really nothing new. Back in the 80s, we were looking at how we trace and how we track the flow of materials. For construction sites, is very important because it's really like the supply chain of, you're looking at the car manufacturing, you need to know exactly what materials you have available, when they're going to be introduced in your production line and so forth. So this kind of created that kind of environment. Of course, now you are moving workers outside the actual execution or the first line, let's say, of work, into a more remote areas that they could monitor and control what was happening. So the idea was to put people in safer environments, if you will. And of course, this also led to other things that we now get to the details in the way you organize your plants and your sites, on the construction site. Now, when you go back to the construction sites today, this is how they look like, right? Not much automation, still lots of people, very hard and difficult environments to handle. So make it really, really challenging to robots. All the things that we did in the 80s and 90s didn't really make it. This kind of resonates to me with what Professor Christoph mentioned, that some of the commercial things that were put out in the market really didn't make it, or was discontinued in a different level, right? So when you look at the goals, now you sit with a construction manager, when you look at the wish list of engineers or of owners, what do you think robots or construction automation could do? They come out with exactly the same things that we were thinking back in the 80s, right? You have, of course, improved construction conditions for workers, so basically relieve the workers from the physical demanding work, enhance safety and all those things that we talk about. Of course, economic gain, because if you are able to improve productivity by reducing manpower or whatever, you're able to save cost and time on projects, which is significant for contractors or owners as well. Also, you can argue that you can improve the quality of the finished products, right? The level of tolerances that you're dealing with these robotic systems will allow you to achieve a much better finished components in terms of installation of windows or whatever it is, as you compare it to the traditional manual labor, right? And also, like any other industry, we would like to take advantage of the current technology, right? Don't just kind of be the old dinosaur in the room that is not really trying to incorporate new things and make things better. So what is different now? When you look at the 70s, 80s, 90s, and you look in 2021, what is different now, right? First, I guess in line with what we have all experienced, COVID has accelerated significantly the thinking of automation and indirectly robotization of some of the components that we're doing, some of the processes, right? But it's not really a major player, if you will, because construction sites still have not been that affected in the sense of reducing the number of people. They were working in open environments, they were kind of spread away. So they were able to sort of satisfy the limitations established by different places with regards to social distancing and things like that. So that was not really a major contribution, but it was a big player, game change player in the sense of the logistics of the material distribution, the design transfer and stuff like that. So really had a bit of an influence, I believe. The other things is the advancements from the technological perspective, right? We talked about this before. Not only prices are getting more affordable, but also the equipments and the things that we're getting are much better in the sense of performance. The tolerances are reducing. We are now looking at the, driven by building information modeling, and I will not get into that, but basically now we're able to have access to much more information, and data analytics is starting to play a big role because now we have different scenarios in a virtual environment that would allow us to kind of understand how things will be built, different alternatives, and so forth. But also, and I think this is important, is a new generations. We have new engineers coming out of school with different mindsets, right? When you talk to, I don't know, a construction manager, who finished 20, 30 years ago, it's a 2D paper-based application, right? When you start introducing digital models and all this kind of new technology, they kind of lose their comfort zone. But newer generations with different mindsets, they're more used to this digital kind of era, if you will. So I think this will really play a significant role. Of course, we're still very far away from having construction sites fully automated, particularly on site. When you look at off-site manufacturing or off-site construction, that's a different story. But when you're looking at a traditional on-site construction, we are far away to actually having this wish idea of robotization and automation for most of the processes, right? So we need to be realistic about that. Now, bringing all that information I just presented 20, 30 years ago, this is what we are doing now. And we're claiming, this is kind of the new construction that we are dealing with. And there's nothing really new. We're still looking at this kind of concept of site factories. This is a building in the UK in 2016, and they claim they were the first company in the UK to introduce this kind of technology, which has the same concept. You have this climbing platform, or this climbing, factory, if you will, where, the interior will look very similar to what I just showed you for the one in the 80s, right? We have these overhand manipulators able to handle different components. You have reduced labor on site. You have more standardized prefabrication, kind of in concept of industrial construction. Of course, we're seeing also this technology push I was referring to before. We're seeing how you're able to integrate all the data that you're getting from different projects. You have now software that allows you to analyze different scenarios. You can bring AI to decide what are the optimal type of configurations, not only from the infrastructure projects, but also for building performance. When you look at efficiency with regards to environment, energy utilization, and so forth. So it's a big change on that. Going a little bit in the building information modeling, I think this is one of the drivers of all this, right? Because it allows you to recreate this digital environment of your building, so whatever you're building, which also kind of creates a path to communicate that digital information into the controllers or into the different systems that you're doing during the manufacturing or the production part, right? But also allows you to move away from the paper-based kind of 2D environments and really immerse yourself in these kind of, buildings, if you will, before they're built. So it allows you to really understand different issues, understand how you integrate different people, how you add, value by maybe automating some of the processes, the welding conditions, the organization of labor, whatever it is. Now you really have a much better understanding. You could, through VR or augmented reality, you could navigate virtually through these things before they actually build, which makes a big difference. Of course, with the actual construction part, we're seeing this is small scale, but some of, we refer to them as tools, really, not robots, because they are not really fully autonomous. They are semi-autonomous for the most part. But I see them as helping workers to do their work in a, better way, if you will, right? So for example, here, this is the semi-automated Mason, SAM. It was, released back in 2016 or so. It is a commercial application. It has been used in several projects that I'm aware of, and still is not, replacing people or replacing workers, which is one of the big fears that we have in the construction sector, right? Instead, it's kind of working alongside workers. So you have to some degree this interaction, very minimum, but still you have this interaction with the humans and the robots, and trying to understand how to create these teams to make, at the end of the day, improvement in the production of whatever you're doing. So that's a bit of a challenge that we're facing now. Another application would be more recent. This was driven mostly by COVID pandemic, but this was nothing new. Remember from the 1980s, I showed you similar equipment that was developed in Japan for painting walls, right? But you can see now we're thinking about these elements. The news are, popping out everywhere about, how robots are gonna change the construction industry. Nothing new. It's just a new version of what we were dealing with before. Now we're in a much better position from the technical perspective, but also because we have a better understanding of how these machines could help us to, do our jobs easier and also more effective. Part of my work, it's not only on the technical side, but from the construction management side, understanding what are the implications of bringing this technology, bringing this robotization into the actual construction sites, and what does it mean with regards to the organization of the companies, and also with the delivery of the projects that we're doing, right? So we need to understand the implications. When we start, I'll maybe quickly go through this image, but what I'm trying to show here is, from what we are now to where we are planning to be when we introduce, more robots and digital fabrication into our projects. We're seeing basically two things: a reduction in the project duration. So we start from a very kind of segmented, planning, construction phase, typically isolated. But as soon as you're able to, digitize some of these elements, you are able to integrate them as well, because you have this much cohesive and integrated approach, essentially, and you're able to communicate the digital design to your equipment and then realize that in a faster way, right? And we were seeing more in the future is a further integration, basically, of that. But I want you to maybe pay attention to the roles, right? You have traditional roles like the designers, the engineers, the drafters, whatever. It's gonna be, simplified, but also it's gonna be evolving in a way. I will get to that a little bit in a couple of minutes. Just without spending too much time, I know we are over time already. But I think one of these concepts is to understand at the very, very lower level, right? Understand the processes that are involved, how you're able to transfer that knowledge. We don't want to lose the knowledge of all the workers inside. We want to transfer that to the algorithms and to the robotic systems that we're doing, come out with your new processes that start looking at the interaction of workers and robots or machines, whatever you want to call it, right? Now, for part of this of that study was to see, okay, depending on the level of automation, how it's going to impact the roles of the different, people interacting in the construction side. And this is only from the construction perspective. So what we were seeing is that as you increase the automation, meaning, for example, you have this 3D printer, then you need to start thinking of the technician. And again, this resonates with some of the comments from my colleagues before. You have programmers, technicians to provide support and so forth. So we're seeing a broader spectrum of opportunities within the construction industry. However, this is very challenging because the first thing when you talk about automating some things is like, I'm gonna lose my job, right? So it's a very, very kind of problematic scenario. More recent studies that I'm working, particularly in collaboration with the Social Science Division in NYU Abu Dhabi, it was originally led with Professor Rebecca Morton, who unfortunately passed away recently. But the idea was to really understanding, for example, just focusing on the interaction of the worker and the robotic arm for the 3D printer, for example. How you are able to exchange information, how you not only rely on the non-verbal communication, but also verbal communication. So there's a lot of experimentation that needs to be done to understand and to create these kind of teams of machine and people working together to achieve a goal that, don't find a need to sabotage each other, right? Again, to kind of overcome some of the difficulties we're facing, many of the construction, markets are, overseen by unions. So unions will defend heavily labor. This is probably a different issue, but I just want to raise that here. And this is something we need to face, right? How we ensure that we have a safety net so we don't leave anyone behind during this transformation and this transaction. So kind of to conclude my presentation, I raise this question again, right? Are we ready again? So in my mind, there's no doubt we're gonna be moving towards a more automated, construction environment. It's not gonna happen short term. I'm thinking maybe you have to put a time, as some of you mentioned before, 50 years from now. But be more realistic, maybe in the next 10 years or so, many of the things will be, we will see big changes in our construction sites, not only in the way we build things, because we might be moving away from on-site construction and more into off-site, modularization, prefabrication, things like that, but also because, it makes more sense economically, right? Also, we're seeing that based on this limited study that we shouldn't be aware, we shouldn't be too worried about losing jobs right away. There will be a short-term effect, definitely, especially for people with low skills, but there will be an opportunity as well to, create new jobs and new roles, basically. So we need to have the mechanisms in place from either the government, the organizations, whoever, to provide the training necessary to make sure that, again, we don't lose anyone in that transition, right? Of course, there's more research needed, and this is, I guess, the good part for us in academia, right? We need to really, combine engineering, social science is a big opportunity to understand how people interact, transfer that knowledge into how machines and people interact and things like that. So we really need to understand what are the changes that we need to make this transition smooth. And I guess we need to probably go back to, education, like how we educate our engineers or our social scientists to think of, machines and people working together in the future, things like that, right? But still, nothing really easy to do, right? We have a status quo. It's a big deal in construction in particular. We're very old-fashioned, very reluctant to adapt to new technologies. We have, once we overcome that, building authorities, construction codes, we cannot just come out with new materials and new ways of doing things without proving that it's gonna, provide safety and structural integrity to what we're doing, right? So different issue, but we need to deal with that. Of course, the social political implications, right? How we have this kind of environment that, people will feel safe to work alongside a robot, or, the other way around. And then I think something important, I don't know if this is something that you guys are thinking about, probably I'm sure it is about when you start having this, physical cyber interactions, you have now open opportunities for a lot of vulnerabilities, right, with regards to cybersecurity. So making sure that the systems that you prepare or that you have ready to be deployed are secure from a cybersecurity perspective, I think is particularly important in the construction sector, because there will be, the equipment or whatever that is going to be building our infrastructure, our buildings, and so forth. So you want to make sure they are secure. And I'm sorry I had to rush a little bit, but I realize time is up. And I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much, Professor De Soto, for this very exciting, very interesting presentation. I really enjoyed it personally, and I see already questions coming from the chat box. And one of the questions has been, how do you convince, I'll try to summarize it, how do you convince construction companies to invest in robots when the cost seem to be super high at this moment in time, but maybe it's kind of a longer term investment? So what do you do in this situation?
Yeah, this is a very good question with a very not easy or straightforward answer, right? I guess it depends significantly on the culture of the organization, but also of what they want to do in the long term, right? If they want to be leaders of, how we go and change for the better the construction industry, not only from the workers' perspective, but also because you will be able to produce or to provide to your clients better products, right? Better buildings, higher quality and things like that. Of course, there is a price you have to pay for that. But as long as you realize that and you put that on your, kind of your objectives, I think it would be relatively easy to convince serious contractors, for example, that investing in this kind of technology or this kind of way of redesigning the construction industry will be paying off, right, in the future. But I don't really know. I don't know.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions? Maybe we can take another very quick question. We're going over time, so I think we'll have to wrap up at this point. I would like to, any questions out there? Otherwise, I would like to thank again all the speakers, all the contributors on the panel discussion, and everybody, all the audience for joining us on this session. And I'm looking forward to see hopefully all of you joining in about maybe a bit more than half an hour from now on the second session. So until then, please stay safe and healthy, and get a little bit of refreshment before we come back to the second session. Thank you very much, everybody, and talk to you in about half an hour from now. Take care.